What's up, guys? We are back with another NECA Toys review, taking a look at the latest Alien and Predator from NECA, but this is something different. This is not your standard Alien or Predator. We're taking a look at some new vintage style figures, so Kenner type stuff. We're taking a look at the Berserker Predator today, and this guy is very much a Kenner style of figure in terms of sculpt, the look, the articulation, but more importantly, the package. This is very much a Kenner style package. I mean, they are very close, and I love this type of packaging. There's a little bit of difference here. Some things are maybe on the opposite side, or the bubble itself is a little bit different, but this is a really close recreation of the Kenner packaging. And then the back of the package has the very Kenner style cross sell with the callouts for action features, accessories, things like that. And then we're also taking a look at the NEOMORPH Alien here. So more of that same stuff, just done up in a xenomorph motif. So you've got the artwork there on the top, figure in the bubble, and then the back gives you the same of that cross sell with the new cross sell, and then NECA's Kenner homage stuff on the back, as well as callouts for the action features. So I cannot stress enough how much the packaging plays a big factor in my interest in this. So it's going to be tough to want to rip these guys off the card, but we've got to do it because I really want to see what's going on in here. So let's pull them out and take a look. Alright, and here they are out of the package. So we've got our Berserker Predator and our NEOMORPH Alien. So of course we've got the Predator from Predators and the Alien from Alien Covenant. And these are obviously something very different. They are, well, they're very familiar to me, but they're also something that promises to be a really cool vintage style line from NECA. And I gotta say right off the bat that this is never anything that I expected to be getting from NECA. I didn't think they were gonna go down this road. Obviously they're doing some retro-y style stuff currently, but this was never on my radar until they just sort of came out and said, hey, we're doing this. And I have a big soft spot for that original Kenner line. It's something that I was very heavily into as a kid. I still have a number of pieces from those lines. So it's really cool to be able to get some stuff that was never possible in those lines. And these two, of course, would be because these movies came out far after those lines, and Kenner itself was long gone. So let's jump right in and take a look at them. We're going to do each one individually because obviously they're very different. They're coming out together at the same time, but they're very different toys. They just happen to go hand in hand, really. So we're going to take a look at the Predator first, and then we'll take a look at this gnarly little white dude. So I wanted to take a look at the Predator first because really he is the more consistent figure with the older actual vintage line. And as I look through these figures, I kind of realized that I don't have hardly any open vintage Predators. Most of what I have are on cards. I have a lot of open Aliens, but I only have one open vintage Predator. So we're going to have some comparisons, but not as many as I thought I was going to. I did not understand what my own collection was, it seems. So this guy is truly quite similar to what we used to get from Kenner. He doesn't have any real action features built into the figure itself, which is what we saw a lot of with the vintage line, but he does come with an action feature type of accessory, and he comes with, you know, all the stuff that you would expect to get, but he's very similar in form factor, in just overall sculpt, kind of the pre-posed thing that was very prevalent in the 90s lines. So he has some articulation, but he's not dynamic, really. He basically kind of does a handful of things. The head can swivel, so it just swivels at the neck there. You do have a waist twist as well. Mine is really tight, but he does twist. It just needs to be broken up, really, I think is what it is, because he moves fine. It's just kind of tight. The arms swivel at the shoulders. There's nothing else on his left arm. You can swivel the right as well, but he does have a rotating forearm on the right side due to one of the accessories. And then you've got swiveling legs, but because of how this guy is sculpted, he's got one of those very 90s things where one foot is, you know, forward, one foot is backwards. Something that, you know, you saw a lot of in, well, this particular line, but also something like Turtles. You saw that all the time in the Turtles line. So he really kind of stands in one particular stance, and then you kind of move him around, twist him, move those arms a little bit to give him some life. But you undoubtedly know where I'm going with this figure. It is 100%, and I cannot stress this enough, it is 100% a looks thing, it is a feel thing, and it's a nostalgia thing. Because again, I truly love that vintage Kenner line. It's something that I've held on to for a very long time. I just really dig those toys. I love the crazy designs that we used to get in that line. And this really looks like something that we might have gotten back then. It is, of course, a little bit more detailed than some of the Kenner stuff. It's, you know, typical NECA stuff. Some things are very much more detailed than you might expect for the price point, because these guys are only 15 bucks. And I know that, you know, might seem a little high for this type of product, but I really don't think it is. I think it falls right in line with something like this that you would see at retail, and I think they've done a great job. I love the idea of this particular figure. I love the idea of this particular style of figure. You know, this pre-pose kind of thing does not bother me. It works really well. I'm a kid that grew up playing with figures like this, so it's like a trip back in time in a way to be able to get something like this again. And I love the sculpt on this figure. I'm sure we're going to see some parts reuse out of this guy. It's typical Predator stuff. They always kind of share parts, but you do have some unique paint detail. So you've got like the red and the black here. You've got the copper kind of color for the armor. There is some nice paint shading for the musculature, and just to bring out the different skin tones, which you wouldn't necessarily have maybe gotten on some figures, at least not to this degree in the Kenner line. And you've got this, I mean, what is ultimately a fantastic head sculpt. I love the design of this Predator to begin with, so it's really cool that they were able to incorporate some of this, you know, kind of exposed musculature on the head, the kind of design that it has up there, those red markings, the red mouth. He definitely looks incredibly angry, and I really like just about everything that's going on from the neck up. You've got the Predlocks, of course, and they've even gotten some paint detail back here for the red spray on the backside, which looks just tremendous. I really, really like this figure. I think that's coming through quite well. I think he works exceptionally well. He, of course, is a little bit different from some of the stuff that we got in the Kenner line, because the Kenner line was really focused on really wacky stuff, really goofy things, honestly. The Kenner line is weird and wild and kind of stupid in a lot of ways, which, frankly, I really love. But this guy is right out of a movie, so that's kind of a different thing on its own for the most part. But I do think it's pretty cool to be able to get some actual Predators now in this line that very much, and I can't stress enough, very much mimic the look and feel of that old line. Now, in typical Predator fashion, he does come with some accessories, because what kind of Predator would he be without some weaponry and without a biomask? So you do have his very unique style of mask, so the one that has a more traditional kind of basic mask from the mouth up, but the lower jaw is that kind of bone design, which I love. It comes across maybe a little more cool in the larger scale figures, or of course in the movie, but I think they get the point across pretty well. You can see that there's some teeth on the bottom jawline there kind of sticking through, and then just the general idea behind this mask works at this scale, and it just kind of pops on and off. You just sort of sit it over top of the head, and it sits on there really well. I've had no issues with it coming off or falling needlessly. You've also got a blade for his right arm. There's a hole on this side, and that's also why you get the ability to twist this forearm to give you a little bit more dynamic range. I have had some issues with this thing falling out. Not like it just, you know, it's obviously not falling out now, but if I handle it a little too roughly, it does tend to kind of pop out. So keep your eye out on that one. And then he, of course, has his plasma caster over here. And this thing is a little large, but it has the action feature. Like I mentioned, he doesn't have an action feature in the body itself. It's built into his gun. And this thing is in kind of typical vintage fashion. It's oversized. It's a little grandiose. It's definitely much bigger than it really needs to be. And it's got a lot of detail in it. No real paint because, well, that's the style here. And then you've got the plasma bolt that pops out of it, and you just push a button on top over here and it'll fire off. And I'm not going to let it go flying across the room because that's when I start to lose things, but it does have some range on it, and he really has just about everything he needs to be a complete Predator, even at this smaller vintage style and scale. And of course, we absolutely have to do a comparison when it comes to this stuff, because I think it's important to see exactly what we're dealing with. You can see that this guy definitely does fit the form factor. He seems like he kind of meshes with an older figure, but when you get a little close, you can see that this guy definitely has a little bit less detail, certainly not as much paint, and just a little bit, you know, he's a little bit older. He looks like he might be vintage figure, but this guy looks like he belongs alongside him. They're similar profile, similar size. They've got those oversized weapons. You know, the mask is a little oversized, and it just works. I think NECA, again, has done a really good job to put this figure into a world where he can go alongside, you know, 20-ish-year-old figures. Now, next up we have got our NEOMORPH alien. So this guy he's definitely different. That's the only way to really describe it. It's a different type of alien. It's certainly not similar to pretty much any normal type of xenomorph. And this is the one figure of the two that doesn't necessarily mesh as well into the vintage line, because frankly, the vintage alien stuff is pretty wacky. If you've been familiar with any of the NECA Kenner Tribute alien figures, you know that they have some really weird designs, and most of the time a lot of those figures were translucent or had metallic paints and stuff like that, and this guy definitely does not have that. He's also just kind of weird too, but I do think that they have the idea down when it comes to this one. I'm really curious why this one might have been the chosen one. There are definitely things I'd much rather have seen, but this guy is clearly being done in that style, and I think it does come through pretty well, but he maybe doesn't mesh alongside other aliens as well as the Predator does. He also is kind of limited. He doesn't do a great deal. So you've got a swiveling legs, and then you've got a swiveling arm, and he is again another one of those figures that is pre-posed basically, so he kind of just sits there. You do have a moving arm, and it actually activates the action feature. So you move this right arm a little bit and it pops out the inner jaws, which are these are for some reason slightly more terrifying to me than they probably should be, just because they look so freaking weird. Everything about this just seems weird to me in a general sense, but they do have moving jaws as well, so you can kind of open and close them a little bit more, and then they pop back in and they sit there pretty tightly. You just kind of have to get them in there the right way to make them work, and then they'll pop back in and then they stay. Once they're in there, they usually don't ever seem to pop back out until you hit the lever in that arm. So he doesn't have a lot of movement capabilities, but he looks no less gruesome for any kind of lack of articulation. And speaking of gruesome, I mean, this guy is a weird design. It's a very gaunt, gnarly, bony, weird-looking alien, and I'm not a huge fan of the design of this one. This movie isn't exactly one of my favorites, but I do think it translates pretty well into this weird kind of deformed style. Again, I'll show you some comparisons to other Kenner aliens, but this guy does work pretty well, and I do think that NECA did a good job on the sculpt. Like, the fingers are incredibly nasty and elongated and just bony and gnarly looking. Same with the tail. You can see all of the individual, kind of spines that run down through it, all of the barbs that come off the back, his weird kind of cone head, and just that inner jaw, again, is something really creepy. I think the creepy factor on this figure really comes through for me. There's also a kind of dirty overspray across the entirety of the figure, so it makes him pop a little bit more. It brings out some of the sculpt work, some of the line work, which is something that we likely would have never gotten on a Kenner figure. He honestly might have been like a translucent plastic based on some of the other figures that we got. So he is kind of just a weird little thing, and I almost didn't get him because, well, it's not my movie when it comes to alien stuff, but I just couldn't pass this figure up. I knew as soon as I saw him, like, yeah, I have to check this thing out. It's just too weird to not want him, and he's definitely, my least preferred of the two, but I can't deny the fact that this thing is really weird looking, and it's just creepy in its own way. And speaking of, well, creepy, he does come with an accessory. This is kind of the one thing I suppose he could come with. He comes with like the baby version of the NEOMORPH, and this thing is even creepier. It doesn't do anything. It's just got some glued on arms there, so be careful. I started to try to move them thinking that they had rotation to them, but these definitely do not. But he definitely looks like this weird little creepy thing that I just can't describe it. Something about it, those lifeless little eyes in there, the overspray on it, the pink nature of like the abs and the face. It's just a weird little thing, and that's all it is. It's a weird, goofy thing, and I absolutely love it. And then here he is, just like with the Predator, next to a couple this time of examples of vintage style figures. So you've got a more traditional Xeno here with the Scorpion alien, but of course, just like I said, he's covered in metallic paints. And then you've got something that's a little bit maybe closer to the NEOMORPH in the fact that this is like a quadruped. So you've got a rhino alien, but he's done up in translucent plastic. So he meshes in some ways, but I don't think he meshes as well as the Predator, because he does in many ways. He looks so very different from your standard Xenos. Even this guy with the big head, he kind of looks like a xenomorph. This thing, you know, for someone who maybe isn't familiar with aliens, might not know at all that this thing was supposed to be in any way related. But I do think the style very much comes through. I just know that if this guy came out in the vintage line, he would not be nearly as detailed in the paintwork. And it might not come through all that well on camera, but there is a lot of paint overspray on this guy to really bring out that sculpt, something that we wouldn't have seen like this. So overall, I mean, can you believe it? I'm pretty happy with these. The Predator is definitely my favorite of the two. There is no doubt about it. And I'm not sure I had any expectations otherwise because, I mean, Predator is generally my thing more than Alien anyway. But I do think that the Predator translates into this line better just because of what it is. The NEOMORPH works, but he's still very different from a lot of this other stuff. What I really, really want to see is, frankly, just more. I want to see more Predators, I want to see more aliens, but I would absolutely love it if NECA was able to go this crazy route that Kenner did and give us new, unique designs, give me more weird animal-infused aliens, give me more goofy Predators. I think that they absolutely could take this and run with it, and I would buy every last one of them. I am really excited for the future of this line, despite the fact that I don't need another Predator and Alien line to collect, but this is right up my alley. If you have any interest in those vintage lines, you owe it to yourself to at least check these out because I'm sure you will have some fun with them. So that's going to do it for this look at the NECA Toys Classic Berserker Predator and NEOMORPH Alien. Let me know what you guys think. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and until next time.